So the next two speakers, I'm allowed to move this one along. Thank you. Good enough. So the agenda is there. We're on paying for long-term care. Chris Smith and Megan Kaiser. And start with Chris Smith, and what is next? Good enough. So Chris concentrates his practice on special needs planning, elder law, and estate planning. Having a sister with Down syndrome, Christopher has had a lifelong passion for special needs issues and has extended that passion to elder advocacy, which we know we need. Christopher has become the chair of the Elder and Disability Rights section of the State Bar of Michigan in October, frequent speaker regarding elder and special needs issues. He's licensed to practice law in both Indiana and Michigan, was a litigation attorney in Indianapolis before moving to Michigan. He graduated from Indiana University Maurer School of Law, magna cum laude, if you please, Order of the Croix, where he also served as managing elder of the Indiana Law Journal. Prior to law school, he majored in business and history at the University of Virginia and worked in finance for Procter & Gamble. And Megan's sharing the stage with him, and she received her BS in Community Health Education from Eastern Washington University, became a licensed social worker in the state of Michigan in 2005. Her career is focused on the elderly and aging population. She's passionate about programs and services that meet the needs of seniors and individuals with special needs. Before joining, I'm going to pronounce it, is it Callaghan? Pardon? Okay. Chaljan and Tripp, thank you very much. She was with Region 7 of Area Agency on Aging Social Work Supervisor for the Medicaid Waiver Program. Certified MMAP, and we've had MMAP member on the board, but that's Medicare and Medicaid Assistance Program, an aid program for anybody, Medicare and Medicaid assistance, particularly Medicare during the AEP, which is the annual enrollment period coming up, right? Okay, she holds a certificate in aging from Boston University, Institute of Geriatric Social Work. She's been appointed to serve the Tomei PACE Ethics Committee in Jackson and Region 2 Area Agency on Aging Executive Board. She currently serves on the Jackson County Walk to End Alzheimer's and is a member of the National Association of Social Workers, Michigan chapter. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Chuck, for inviting us and for the opportunity to be here. Trying to do this in 40 minutes is a challenge, but luckily I think Don and John did a very nice job of setting us up as far as a lot of the topics we're going to be able to cover. And you'll notice I'm an attorney, but up here is Megan, who's a social worker, and I think that is an important piece that I want you guys to go forth with. If I could criticize my colleagues or some of my colleagues in the elder law field a little bit, is I think too often elder law gets associated with Medicaid as kind of analogous. The elder law is Medicaid. And yes, we do Medicaid. We do plan for Medicaid. But the problem with Medicaid is there's very limited housing options that Medicaid could pay for. And we'll discuss that here in a little bit and can continue to discuss that in our question and answers payment. But let me ask you right now, how many in this room's dream is to be in a Medicaid nursing facility? And so you quickly realize as an elder law attorney that is doing a disservice to our clients because the majority of our clients don't want to end up in a Medicaid nursing facility. That is the place of last resort. And so that is why, I view it as far as our elder law practice, that when I practice this area, it's very important for me to practice in a team with somebody like Megan, because we're looking at both all the options that Donna and John talked about and looking at all those options and looking at the individual's medical needs and then looking at financial resources and payment options. You can't look at those two things independently. They go together. And that's how we serve our clients best, because every individual is different, both in their medical needs, their age, and their financial resources. And without looking at the individual, we can't make a standard plan. And so when you see an elder law attorney that says, this is, save all your assets, put it all in a trust, and you'll all be good, that's your long-term care needs. Yeah, that is an option, but be careful. because often it is not a personalized option for that individual. So the problem then I have is everybody's like, how do you pay for long-term care? And I'm like, okay, well, we can shove all your money into a trust, and you can go to a nursing facility when the time comes. But that's not necessarily what you want. And if I had a magic crystal ball and could just see what your future needs are, well, then I can give you the perfect plan. Unfortunately, we don't. And so we have to do our best we can based on the knowledge that we have, both with somebody like Megan as a social worker, knowing both the individual's medical needs and the housing options that are available, and coming up with that ideal plan, combined with my type of knowledge of both what are the legal tools we have, both on an estate planning and often, such things as a power of attorney, guardianship, or conservatorship, and our knowledge as far as government benefit programs and those rules. It all comes together in what we do as a long-term care plan. So, with that, we're going to move ahead here, and we're going to look at what are the various financial options that an individual has. Obviously, you heard both John and Donna say, if you've got financial resources of your own, you've got all the options on the table. Private paying is always an option, and private paying, frankly, creates the most options. What we often do when we have an initial appointment is we give you a questionnaire, and we have you put in that questionnaire all your assets and also, importantly, your income. And you do analysis on that. One thing that's very important to me is understanding what I call is the individual's burn rate, meaning if somebody needs long-term care, how much income is coming in? And that gives me an idea of how much of the person's assets will be burned through. And I think a lot of times people don't take that extra step. They look, okay, we have $500,000. It's going to cost us $5,000 a month for the assisted living facility. And so we're going to run through all these assets in what, 5,000 in 50 months. But what they don't forget is they also have an income stream there. And maybe they have $4,000 a month in income. And so maybe it's not as bad. Maybe they have more options than what they think because of what their burn rate is. So that's also a very important thing for us to look at. Now, beyond private funds, what are our options or what do we look for? And then we start looking at what are the government benefits that might be available to that individual. And we obviously start with Medicare. Medicare is one of my passions. It's how I met Chuck when we were looking at challenging Blue Cross's getting rid of the legacy Blue Cross plan. But unfortunately, and I say it kind of crudely, but I think it's important, there are good diseases to have with Medicare, and there are bad diseases to have with Medicare. Medicare is great if you have acute diseases, and such as cancer, heart attack, those type of cardiovascular diseases, because Medicare will, if you have a good Medigap plan, generally cover 100%. A lot of my clients never see a bill with some of those more acute diseases. Medicare is not designed, and Medicare is horrible when it comes to more chronic diseases, such as Alzheimer's and dementia, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and those type of diseases in which require custodial care, because Medicare doesn't cover basically anything for custodial care besides maybe some hospice relief. And as you heard John say, everybody talks about the 100 days that you have in a skilled nursing facility, and they assume that they have 100 days in a skilled nursing facility, and we're constantly having to remind our clients that's 100 days if you're actively receiving skilled care in the nursing facility. And as John suggested, that's down to 2 weeks on average. And so Medicare is paying even less and less in nursing facilities and that only applies in most instances after a person has had 3 nights in a hospital. So Medicare is not good, provides very little for long-term care coverage outside of the hospice benefit.
Right. And I don't think he means it's not good. It's not good when we're looking at paying for long-term care, is what he's talking about.
Yeah. So that's where our Medicaid system comes in. Medicaid does offer opportunities for paying for long-term care. The problem with Medicaid, of course, is it's means tested. There are assets and income tests associated with Medicaid. Now, there are three options, three different areas in which Medicaid could pay in Michigan. I know there's some individuals on the web that might be outside of Michigan, so I apologize if I get Michigan specific. But nationwide, Medicaid offers a benefit for skilled nursing facilities, okay? If a nursing facility accepts Medicaid and is certified to accept Medicaid patients, we can get you qualified for Medicaid in that nursing facility if we meet certain assets and income tests. And there are certain different planning techniques we can do to get you qualified for that. Now, there are two other Medicaid programs that have been briefly mentioned before me that you might be able to get Medicaid to cover. These are Medicaid at Home programs. One is the MI Choice Waiver Program, and that can provide some caregiving at home. As it was mentioned, you applied through the area of agency to get it. And it's generally wonderful. There can be a wait list. Those wait lists can vary depending on where you live in the state. But the problem with the My Choice Waiver Program is it has a hard income cap. If your income is $1 over $2,250 a month, you can't get this program. Your only Medicaid option is a skilled nursing facility. It makes no sense. As was mentioned earlier, long-term care costs are a lot cheaper in the home than in a nursing facility, so you'd think our government would want people to be at home because it would be a lot cheaper to help cover Medicaid. But that's the rule. So I know a lot of, particularly Chrysler retirees have pensions, and that often can kick them over that $2,250 limit. But that's the rule. And that same rule, unfortunately, applies to Medicaid coverage in a PACE facility, which John talked about in some detail before. To get the Medicaid coverage in a PACE program, it also has that $2,250 coverage. But if you're under that, the waiver program can be a great option. Long-term care insurance is has a very troubled history and is a very complicated issue because, unfortunately, our long-term care insurance program was developed along the lines of how we would buy home insurance. We buy home insurance for a period of 6 months or so, and if our house burns down in that 6-month period, the home health insurance pays, right? The home insurance pays. And if the home doesn't burn down in that 6 months, well, we spent that money on the home insurance and it's gone, right? I mean, that's the bargain. And it works in a home insurance industry. But that's also how our long-term care insurance industry developed. Meaning we pay the general typical long-term care insurance policy was developed, so you pay that long-term care insurance premium during that period of time. If you need long-term care during that period of time, then it would kick in. If you didn't need long-term care and during that time, well, you paid your premium, you didn't need long-term care, that was the bargain, it's done. And the problem was, actuarially, companies never figured out this program right, because when are you going to start thinking about needing that long-term care insurance? When you're in your 60s and 70s, because that's when you're statistically more likely to start needing that long-term care insurance policy. And when is that going to get more expensive for the long-term care insurance company? When you're in your 70s and 80s. And so, of course, suddenly they have to increase the premiums to pay for the long-term care, and the system just didn't work very well. Now, you still can find long-term care insurance plans. As John suggested, each long-term care insurance plan is different. You have to read the terms of that various plan. Some of it will have different coverage rates depending on whether you're at home or whether you're using it in a nursing facility. The last thing I will say, though, there is a new product that we're seeing more and more, and that is a hybrid life insurance and long-term care policy. And that makes a lot more logical sense, in my opinion, for people who can afford it. And that hybrid policy, you're basically buying a life insurance policy that has a rider to draw down during your lifetime if you need long-term care. And makes a lot more sense, I think, because it's a lot easier for an actuary to do the analysis as far as somebody needs. So if you are concerned about long-term care insurance and you find the traditional long-term care policies are too expensive for you, you might look at one of those hybrid type long-term care or hybrid life insurance policies and see if that might be appropriate. The next one is VA benefits, veterans benefits. And there are basically two different types of veterans benefits that you see. One is service-connected. You became disabled while you were in the military. And that has its own set of rules. Where we're seeing this really help people right now as far as our client basis is our Vietnam veterans. Because there is a presumption that if you were exposed to Agent Orange, that you develop certain conditions, and the list is quite long as far as the type of conditions, such as diabetes, for example, you are presumed that the cause of that was your service in Vietnam and your exposure to Agent Orange, and you automatically get certain benefits, which can be very beneficial, okay? So there's the disability side. Then there's the enhanced pension, or what's more commonly called aid and attendance side of veterans benefits, which can provide a subsidy which can assist an individual in an assisted living facility, at home. Donna mentioned pretty much in any setting. And that has an asset test, and the key to qualify for that benefit is, first of all, you have to have served 1 day during wartime service. Wartime service is pretty broad. We're right now in a period of wartime, right now, as how it's defined. So that is one requirement, but you didn't actually have to serve overseas to qualify for the aid and attendance benefit. It also has an asset test. As of Monday of this week, the VA just announced new regulations as far as the VA benefits for the aid and attendance that has completely changed qualifications, some for the good and some for the bad, all right? I will tell you right now, there are some attorneys and other organizations out there that for years have said, just give away your assets and you can qualify for the VA benefits, because VA benefits didn't have any penalty if you gave away your assets and you applied for the VA benefits. Unlike Medicaid. Medicaid has always had a 5-year penalty. If you give away assets, they look back 5 years, and they will penalize you for any assets you gave away. VA didn't have that. Well, as of Monday, they will. Starting October 31st, they will look back 3 years. And if you gave away assets within that past 3 years, they will penalize you. So that is no longer a planning option for VA benefits. And so be careful if somebody tries to sell that idea to you. On the other side, though, the benefit of how these new rules changed is before it was kind of a black box. People would say, do you qualify for VA benefits? And it was subjective. VA kind of had this black box behind the scenes and kind of made a case-by-case determination if somebody was impoverished enough to qualify for VA benefits. Well, now, under the new rules, they're applying kind of the same rules that we would apply for Medicaid. And so, basically, if somebody has $123,000, excluding the house, then they can qualify for, on the asset side, for the VA benefits. And then basically whether or not they qualify on the income side depends on how much their medical costs are. And whether or not they have more medical costs will increase the amount of aid and attendance a person can get. But don't think the aid and attendance is always going to be the full answer. Because the maximum benefit, if you have a married couple with a spouse that qualifies for aid and attendance, the absolute maximum you could get through aid and attendance is $2,169. So that's helpful, particularly in an assisted living facility. That might make the difference of whether you could stay there or not. So don't let me diminish that. But it's not a huge amount of money. It's not a huge amount of benefit, such as could provide care in a skilled nursing facility. Obviously, we have, I hope this never applies to any of you, but you could have no-fault accident insurance, and then private insurance are also potential options. The one thing that I will really emphasize to you, time and money equals more options. Money, does solve pretty much all issues when you're looking at particular options. But there's another important piece of this equation: time. The more time we have, the more time we can get somebody like Megan involved, the more time we can look at these benefits, the more options we can find for an individual. Crisis planning is never good planning, okay? In crisis planning, there's wait lists for places, there's immediate medical needs, there's other family caregiving type of restrictions that we have to deal with. But if we can see somebody early enough, even if they don't have the ideal financial resources, we can increase their number of options simply because we have the time to plan for it.
So I kind of wanted to piggyback off of that. When Chris says crisis, we have a lot of families that come through our door in crisis. Maybe it's a husband and a wife, and the wife is caring for the husband who has Alzheimer's, dementia. And they've waited until she's into caregiver burnout and can no longer care for him anymore, and she needs to get him transitioned to a facility or someplace else in the next few days because of her health issues or that type of thing. So that's where we talk about crisis. That doesn't give me a lot of time to do planning, maybe find a good facility, find home health agency to come in and assist with the care. It's just, crisis. Whereas if they had come in several months before, maybe a year before, when she knew she was getting worn out from caring for him and didn't feel like she could provide those services and meet his needs there anymore, then we have time to plan and schedule. A lot of the facilities, whether it be assisted living facilities, nursing homes, they all have wait lists. A majority of them have wait lists. So to get on the wait list is really a key when you're looking at someone that has health issues that might need care, as far as assisted living care or long-term skilled care, or even in-home care, too.
So we created this chart. I put some copies in the back there. I don't think I printed out enough because, honestly, this is a great crowd. This is kind of our chart on how we look at things. You can see the left-hand side, we're really looking at the different options for where a person is living, or the ideal place for where that person would like to receive care. And then we kind of work ourselves across the right-hand column as far as the different ways to pay for that option. And we come together and we kind of create the best plan for those options. As you can see, if somebody's paying privately, they have all the options on the board. Medicare, very little, except for hospice at home. There's very little, but certainly no custodial care. If somebody can qualify for Medicaid, they might have the options, whether or not they qualify them, choice or PACE program. They might have more options than not. But again, that has a $2,250 income limit. The long-term care insurance depends on what the long-term care insurance policy actually says. And the VA pension, that income can be applied to any setting. But again, it's limited. There's a maximum there of $2,169 for families.
So when we're talking Medicare, one of the things I wanted to mention is people are in the hospital, they come home from the hospital, and usually 9 times out of 10 they have Medicare services, whether it be a skilled nurse coming in to check on you, you might have a bath aide 2 times a week, you might have OT, PT, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. What families don't understand is that's not long-term. Was it Donna? Is it presented on that? And she mentioned you're not going to get 24-hour care through your Medicare. So you need to take that, because a lot of times we'll talk with families and they'll say, oh, Medicare is going to come in and they're going to provide all this care, and they're not going to do. And it's for a certified period of time, and then they can recertify you for a period of time. So I usually tell families usually maybe 6-8 weeks, and then they'll see if they're going to be recertified for those services. But it's not going to provide that 24-hour care. The other thing is the My Choice Waiver Program. Are any of you familiar with that or had family members that have been on it? The My Choice Waiver Program is through Medicaid, and that's designed for individuals that might otherwise be in a nursing home, and it allows them to be able to stay in their own home or sometimes assisted living facilities. And once again, as Chris said, you have to meet what's called the nursing home level of care, and then you also have to have that financial piece. Your income needs to be less than $2,250 a month. and your assets have to be under 2,000. So, and then the other thing is long-term care insurance. And we had already talked with the gentleman here earlier. The long-term care insurance, you simply, for those of you who have it and you want to be able to stay in your home and see if it's going to cover the services you need in your home, the thing to do is to file a claim, and then usually a nurse will come out and assess you and see if the care that you need qualifies for that insurance policy.
So as I see it, we only have about 3 minutes of our official time left, and obviously we could spend all day on this, and I could spend all day on Medicaid alone.
Yeah.
So let me talk about Medicaid, because I know that is a question that we frequently get. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Well, let me talk a little bit about Medicaid, because I know that is always of interest to people. And I told you, first of all, there's the setting. Whether the setting accepts Medicaid. Certain skilled nursing facilities, and frankly, the majority of skilled nursing facilities will accept Medicaid, but it can vary. The general rule for a single person on Medicaid is assets have to be $2,000 or less. Your income has to be less than the private pay rate of that nursing facility. That's for an individual, an unmarried individual. Not counted in that $2,000 is the individual's home. In Michigan, and I will be frank, Michigan still has pretty liberal rules regarding this. As long as an individual lived in that home at some point, they can keep the home and qualify for Medicaid. How you pay for the home is often a challenge while somebody's in a nursing facility. And what we often do in those cases is the individual family member lives in the home, and in exchange for paying the bills of the home, they can live there. The other assets that an individual can have that doesn't count against that $2,000 is a prepaid funeral, a car, and we always say, you'll always hear elder law planners give the analogy, pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. This is, you can have a nice Chrysler, but don't go too luxurious. And the other thing is personal property. I've never seen Medicaid get really particular regarding the stuff around the home, the personal effects, the jewelry, the artwork. They really, in Michigan, hasn't nailed down. Besides that, you can only have $2,000 to qualify for Medicaid. Now, a married couple, the rules are different. Basically, what you're going to do with a married couple is the moment that you go into a hospital or a nursing facility for 30 days, or are expected to be there for 30 days, that's called your snapshot date. And on that date, what Medicaid does is they add up all your assets, and they say, okay, you can keep half of those assets, but there is a minimum and a maximum, and that, I just want to make sure I get it accurate. The minimum right now is $24,720. So worst case, as a married couple, you can keep $24,720, but the maximum you can keep is $123,600. And once your assets are down to that level, you can qualify for Medicaid. Now, I mentioned earlier, you can't gift assets, okay? You can't, the Medicaid can look back 5 years, and if you gifted assets, they're going to penalize you, and you're not going to be able to qualify for Medicaid for several months, and the number of months you won't be able to qualify depends on how much you gifted. But you can gift to a child or other individual with disabilities. So that's something frequently we do. If a family member has a child with disabilities, we can gift to that individual to make sure they're provided for and not have to face this divestment rule that Medicaid has. Now, there are planning techniques that us Medicaid attorneys can use. It's a lot like tax planning. We read the rules and we plan around it. Those rules generally sometimes we can use an annuity, to increase the amount that an individual, a married couple in particular, can keep. Sometimes we can go to court and get what's called a protective order and ask the court to allow an individual to keep more than that $123,000 max. But it's a case-by-case basis as far as what we are able to do for that individual. Now, the deal with Medicaid also is we have this concept called estate recovery. So if you die, Medicaid, for anything they paid out for that individual, becomes a super creditor for that money. And so the money in your estate can go to Medicaid, and they goes to Medicaid first until you've paid that off. Now, Michigan, again, is very liberal in this respect because they only go after assets that go through probate. Assets that go through probate are only assets that are passed by a will, in which you go down to the courthouse, you probate the will, and you pass those assets through a will. But you can avoid that process through beneficiary designations, like you do with your IRAs, like a life insurance policy. You can do that same thing with a bank account. Or that's where you will hear a lot of elder law attorneys talk about ladybird deeds. So for the real property right now in Michigan, you can do a ladybird deed if somebody is on Medicaid, so that that house that you can keep and still qualify for Medicaid can be passed on according to your wishes without going through probate. Now, I will warn you, and I caveat this in every client meeting that I have, that could change. That's a low-hanging fruit that I could see Medicaid challenging. But it is something that currently is a planning option to avoid the estate recovery. Here are my three most important rules that I'm going to give you as far as if long-term care becomes a question, legally, what are the three red flags that causes the most issues if Medicaid is ever being contemplated? First of all is you need a power of attorney that is broad enough to keep you out of court. Okay? If we don't have a broad enough power of attorney, then we have to go to court, and we're at the whim or the subjective beliefs of that judge whether or not we can do certain things. And, you have the attorney's fees associated with going to court. Whereas if we have a power of attorney, and that power of attorney has sufficient expanded powers, then we've got more planning options. We can do some of the creative things that I'm telling you right now. So an expanded power of attorney is the number one thing you can do to benefit yourself, to anticipate the uncertainties of long-term care and maximize the options that we might have in the future. Here's the caveat. Giving a person a lot of powers is a scary thing. So you need to trust the person you're naming under that power of attorney. Because by giving them now those powers, you're also opening yourself up to exploitation or other abuse. So you need to trust that person implicitly. But if you trust that person implicitly, from my view, the more powers you give them, the more options you're giving them in the future to plan for your potential long-term care needs. The second mistake that we see all the time is people not having care agreements. People paying relatives for care, often under the table. And I'm not the IRS. I'm not trying to make a tax judgment, but there is an IRS issue with that. Obviously, if you're paying somebody under the table and they're particularly basically a full-time caregiver, you do have tax implications of doing that. But from a Medicaid standpoint, Medicaid believes that family members, or frankly any individual in the community, is doing something out of love and affection. That they're caring out of love and affection. That's the presumption. And so that if you gave them money for caring for somebody, You were gifting it to them. Even though, I don't, love and affection for taking somebody to the bathroom, only goes so far. But that's Medicaid's assumption. So you got to put a care agreement together in order to overcome that presumption that you're gifting money. And you have to do it before you get paying them. Because they're going to assume that if you do it in the future, that you were just doing this to kind of get around the rules. And so, and this care agreement, in the wisdom of the Department of Health and Human Services, has to have certain requirements, such as a doctor has to certify that this care agreement is required, and it has to be notarized. I don't know how many contracts you guys sign these days that still require a notary, but supposedly that's important to the state of Michigan. So if you're about ready, so I love informal care agreements. I love family members providing care. I love paying family members to care. But if you're going to do that, you probably need to see an elder law attorney to do a care agreement so it doesn't backfire you down the line, and Medicaid comes back and says, hey, all that money you were paying the son, or all that money you were paying a neighbor, that was a gift. All right? And the last thing, kind of should go along with that is be careful with gifting. All right? Gifting assets, Medicaid has a 5-year look back. VA benefits have a 3-year look back. Other programs also have various divestment rules. Gifting assets in anticipation of long-term care is scary. And so don't do it unless you consult professional advice. So,
Questions?
thank you.
That was
Expanded power of attorney, care agreement, don't gift, yeah.
Can you be specific in the direction on the expanded power in writing so that it doesn't get so blown out?
Yeah, and that's something we can customize. And it should be customized. But the expanded powers of attorney that just isn't in a typical power of attorney are such things as gifting. And there are strategic reasons you can gift sometimes as part of Medicaid planning. And obviously we didn't have time in this session to get into all the details of all the techniques that we can use. The creation of trust. That's not something that is naturally assumed in a power of attorney. The creation of a joint account. You cannot add a joint owner to an account unless it's in a power of attorney. Those are expanded options that can help out in long-term care planning, but are also dangerous options if you give it to the wrong person, largely because it can disrupt their estate plan. And that person can totally disrupt, if you wanted to give everything equally to the 4 children and you give it to this one child and suddenly they're adding their name to all these accounts, well then suddenly they've completely disrupted the estate plan. So you got to be careful about it. But those are some of the things we would be looking at.
Gifting to a charity
Yeah.
or a university through an annuity? Your thoughts on that?
From a Medicaid standpoint, that would be a divestment. There is a rule, a caveat rule that says that if you were gifting, if your gift was not anticipation of Medicaid, that it's not a gift, okay? That's technically in the rules. We have a saying in law that says if your main argument is something's against public policy, you're losing. If you're arguing that something wasn't done in anticipation of Medicaid, you have an uphill battle. We're probably going to spend a lot in attorney's fees appealing that and challenging it. But it's considered a gift.
I've only heard overwhelmingly positive or overwhelmingly negative things about reverse mortgages. I don't know where do you go to learn if people should run away or sign up? People ask me this all the time. I don't myself. You should say ask someone financial.
Yeah, I probably will, Donna. From a Medicaid standpoint, I hate reverse mortgages because the rules are quite complicated now. It used to be actually be a lot easier, but the rules have gotten quite complicated as far as exempting that money that you got from the reverse mortgage. So it's, there's some exceptions, but if you get $80,000 from a reverse mortgage, you've suddenly converted an asset that's exempt, your home, and you've created an asset that's countable in the $80,000 you received from the reverse mortgage. That didn't used to be the case until about, 2 years ago? And they changed the rules, and now it can be a problem. So I'm going to narrow my answer right now to Medicaid because we could spend a whole hour on reverse mortgage, but generally a reverse mortgage is never a good idea. Now I will say from a Medicaid planning standpoint also, if somebody does have a mortgage on the home and they're trying to qualify for Medicaid and they need to get their assets under, say, that $123,000 mark, one of the greatest things you can do is pay off that mortgage. And that's an easy way to qualify or to get those assets down to qualify for Medicaid. But I'm not saying reverse mortgages aren't the right answer. It could be in some cases. In some cases, you probably have examples where it's really worked.
We don't see as much of them anymore. I want to say, 10 years ago, we used to run into them all the time, but I don't see a lot of people with them anymore. Not like they used to.
Just a comment.
You're on.
Just a comment on the veterans benefit. My mother was able to take advantage of that. My father was a veteran, so I want to make them know that you don't have to be a veteran in order to apply.
Yeah, no, John, that is a great point. And the only, so a spouse can qualify for that aid and attendance benefit. The only thing I will say about that is the potential maximum benefit is less. So it's $1,176 this year. But that still doesn't mean it's not a great resource that's potentially available.
Yeah, a couple things from the webinar. One, you might need to know more about the MetLife plan that FCA or Chrysler had set up years ago. Person bought into the Chrysler MetLife system 27 years ago, has a pretty substantial amount of money there, but apparently, and I think it's the case, they only can get out so much per day when they're under long-term care. That's my understanding of the rule. That's kind of their question. Is that
would be typical for a long-term care insurance policy. Most long-term care insurance policies I see will have a lower rate for assisted living or at-home care than a nursing facility rate. There will be two rates in the contract.
And that was their question. And the other, I don't think you'd have, but what other states have PACE as far as, and this I think specifically Florida?
It's a national program technically, but John taught me that we're the second. 38.
38 states. I believe Florida is one of them. The National PACE Association would have a national.
Great.
So it's, no, I was going to say, is there a website that you can look at? National PACE
Association.
National PACE Association.
John,
.org.
I'll look up the web address.
John, I'm curious to see real quick how many PACE patients do you see are private paying that aren't relying on Medicaid?
About 2%.
So only about 2% of PACE patients, and that's interesting. So you can technically private pay for PACE, but not many people are currently doing it.
But 45% you're paying is better than paying 100.
Because of the Medicare portion, yeah.
In other words, if you don't qualify for Medicaid, you don't qualify for PACE, it's still better to have PACE and pay the 45%. It's cheaper than paying 100.
Agreed. So thank you.